With me today is Patricia Gent. Trish is a registered nurse and founder of Resiliency Reframed. Trish is here to chat about her recent career transition after 18 years in nursing. Welcome, Trish, and thanks for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Christine.
Okay, so there was a time when I wanted to be a nurse, so I'm really interested to know why you chose nursing and what areas you've spent your career in.
Sure. So, I know a lot of people, when they speak of nursing, they say they've always wanted to be a nurse. I can say that it's always been something that was in the back of my head, but truth be known, I felt like when I got to college, I still wasn't 100% sure. And I just went to one of those intro meetings and I was like, okay, this is it. We went through nursing school, and then I started my career actually in the intensive care unit. And I enjoyed the intensive care unit. I enjoyed taking care of the sickest of the sick. I enjoyed the science behind it. I enjoyed the collaboration with the teams, and I enjoyed being there for the families too. Because, when the patients are this sick, they're not able to talk, they're not able to communicate. So you are truly being their advocate. And I think critical care was always my first love, and probably always going to be the one that, the niche I would say that probably I favor of all of them. But after doing that, the other niche I really got into was critical care research. And, we saw the research coordinators on the unit, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I kind of liked the idea that you weren't really completely removed. You still had a clinical component of it, but you're using those skills in a whole new and different way. So I then fell into critical care research, and, that was just something that was completely different. You started working in a sense that you weren't essentially done with your shift and then done anymore. We had multiple studies that we would be running at a time. We would pinch hit for each other. So there are times where you're trying to submit stuff for the IRB. There's times where we're trying to follow up with patients. There's times where we're enrolling. Some were drugs, some were device, some were sponsor initiated, PI initiated, some were observation. It was just a little bit of everything. And, that's really where you got to learn, I would say, like some details and really specifics into certain things that I probably never would have learned otherwise, especially when we're starting to compare different things.
So did you have a say in any sort of changes that were proposed were you researching the way you were doing nursing, or what was your research around?
Oh, so we worked with a principal investigator, and he was primarily a surgeon. So he was the principal investigator. And with that, we would support a lot of studies that, he would do. Some of his studies were device studies or drug studies that we would be associated with a sponsor. So the sponsor would be running the study, and we would basically be a study site. But then also we call them principal investigator initiated studies. So this was actually where I felt that we really worked as a team, the principal investigator, and it was actually a group of nurses and a couple non-nurses. And we would maybe think if there was a question that we personally wanted to answer and that we wanted to kind of go through, some data that we had from patients that we could possibly answer ourselves.
So what would you say the biggest thing that you learned from your nursing career was?
From my nursing career, one of the biggest things I think I've learned is everyone perceives things very differently. And in really order to make change, we need to make sure everyone has a place at that table and that everyone can really be heard, so we can make sure every aspect is really taken into consideration. And I think that's something that I saw not just in research, but also even in critical care and taking care of the patients and their families, because it wasn't, you had a main team of doctors, but you had the specialists that were there too. And, you also had families, and sometimes the families weren't on the same page. So, and then of course you may throw in like social work and case management. So there's always a lot of different players, and everyone has, when I say different perception, it's also their different specialty or something that they're specifically honing in on and very interested in. So I just think that, say, if anything out of nursing throughout the whole career, it's really about looking at all those different perceptions. And the best outcome is really when we're really able to pull all of it together.
So you went on and did some further study while you were within the nursing field, and you got a master's in leadership and management and also a Lean Sigma Green Belt, which, you know, neither of those are easy to achieve. So what made you decide to pursue additional study, and what role did that play in your career advancement?
Sure. You know, I think I always knew from the beginning I wanted to do further study. I've always enjoyed learning. So I think from that perspective, it was never really a question that I was going to go on further. It was really just me trying to figure out what was the best fit. So, and truth be told, I kind of started my master's 2 or 3 times and then kind of stopped because I wasn't really sure what the best niche was. I knew I wanted to go, but I wasn't sure, was I wanted the nurse practitioner route? Was I wanting to do the education route? But I ended up falling into the leadership and management route because I really thought it was maybe like a way that I could be lifelong learning. And I felt like this was almost like a little bit of a different, you know, niche as well. Just like in research where we're like kind of coordinating like the study and trying to have all these pieces work together, trying to take the ivory tower and put it into practice. I kind of felt that like leadership and management was something very similar. You know, we sometimes were trying to take these higher ideals or these, you know, visions that people had, and how do we actually implement this into the units with the people and actually achieve those goals. So that's really what led me originally to start with and getting my master's in leadership and management and work in that area. And as I was working in that area, I did a lot of work in perioperative services and endoscopy. And in those areas, you have a lot of different, you really do have a lot of different areas all working together as one. So you have preparation of the patient before they even hit the hospital. You have them in the hospital that morning of surgery preparation, the inter-procedure part, and then initially when they come out of surgery. And then the next step is either they're going to get downgraded before they go home, or they're possibly even a 23-hour stay. So when we're trying to really improve like a flow or a functionality, what I found, especially in my first manager job, is that, you know, there's a lot of moving parts. And that's what really first got me interested in the Lean Sigma Green Belt, was really looking at that process of improvement and what can we do to really kind of like eliminate any redundancy, eliminate things that, you know, maybe aren't in the best placement that we're doing, and really trying to optimize, you know, the functionality of what we have. And really what I found too is that once there really was a lot more kind of clarity of what we were going to do when, and more clear assigned roles, and people knew what they were expecting, because that's really a big piece too. It's like, do you know what you're expecting? Do you know what's coming in? It actually made the process a lot smoother. And I think also that's what makes an easier work environment.
Absolutely. I think managing expectations, you know, both in the workforce and just in general in life, I think is hugely important. So I'm really keen on learning a bit more just about your green belt and the Six Sigma program, because it's something that I personally have looked into before and I've wanted to do. I'm one of those people that I want to do everything, and it's hard to choose, you know, what you sort of want to do. So what did you get out of that? Did you think it was worth doing that?
For me personally, I I do think it's worth it, but I have to be completely honest with you. I actually recently took a different course, and another friend of mine was in there, and she was like, I don't know if I'm going to go any further with this. Is it worth me doing the homework? And of course, I'm like, it's always worth doing the homework. So, truth be known, I probably would give that answer no matter what. However, yeah, I think that doing the Lean Sigma Green Belt and part of achieving that green belt, yes, of course, there's always, the attending some classes and of course taking a test. But the reality is the meat of it is really doing a whole, process improvements and, really restructuring a whole workflow. And I guess it was for me, that was probably the very first really big eye opener, because this was the time that I was actually collaborating with my operations counterpart. And it was a group of people that was off site. So we're moving, I could say, further away from the hospital process. And that's when I really saw how many hands were in a pot that maybe didn't need to be. So, I mean, we started with even just some basic things like phone calls coming in that weren't even for them. How can we redirect those calls? And, because we were actually moving at this point out to like a call center area. So it was like, okay, how do we improve the process for our own people, but now in a place where we don't have 100% control of everything that's coming in. And it was really, I think it is very beneficial, because that's really where you learn the importance of the term they use is going to the gemba, going to the work is. Because once you get to where that work is, you see how it's either more complicated than you thought, or there's some more roadblocks than you even imagined, or some that you actually just didn't even know were happening. And what was really obstructing somebody's ability from doing the work to maybe the efficiency that they could.
That's excellent. I have one other question just regarding that. What is your thoughts with respect to, I suppose, management in hospitals and in the medical field in general, of those people within management not necessarily having a medical degree? They're not nurses, they're not doctors, they're outside people coming in to manage hospital or medical environments. What do you think about that? Do you think that they can do it?
I mean, I think on some level they can, in the sense that this is how a lot of them have been functioning, right? I guess I could say I've grown up in this in-between where I've actually been in a hospital setting where they went to, okay, and they actually used the terms at the time, we're going back to the old school model, a doctor and nurse running it, that's the way it should be. However, things have really changed and expanded, to things that are more and more of a system level. And, when things gets expansive like that, you do need someone to look at things from a different viewpoint. However, if you don't have that medical background and medical knowledge, you really need to make sure you have some strong point people with you that have that medical knowledge. And I think then you really do need to take those extra steps of reaching out and asking more questions before making, any assumptions.
Yeah, I agree. I think, there's an area of opportunity there. Obviously, I'm not in that field at all, but I can definitely see some advantages. But I think having somebody like you who's got that medical background, but also have that management and leadership skills is probably the most ideal person that they can possibly have. And you were that person. You were that person for 18 years. You worked as a nurse and you worked in this area. Then you left. Why?
On some, well, gosh, I feel like there's not an easy answer, right? I guess to start, on some level, I was just always working to kind of advance myself. But I think as I was doing this, I was kind of waiting for something else to happen, right? I was waiting for like everything to click and for everything to either like be easier or more relaxed. And and not just easier, more relaxed, right? Like I wanted to have, more balance. And I guess on some level, I felt like I was trying to check all the boxes and make sure I had it all, right? I got the degree, we have the good job, we have the family, we got the house, check, check, check. But somewhere in my, second management job, I'm in the middle of doing this, and it was a relatively smooth transition, and, was doing well at it. And at some point I'm just like, nothing feels any different. And I'm like, I'm experienced in this role at this point, and I've been in this hospital before. I know a lot of these people. I'm making changes, and I'm like, but I'm still working 55, 60 hours a week. I still feel constantly exhausted. I still don't feel like I have a lot of energy, and excitement, and that I almost felt like my world was getting smaller and smaller. But I did enjoy what I did, and I just wasn't sure what it was. So then I, of course, was like, okay, I made the decision that I wasn't going to move forward with another degree until I figured this out, because, that was on the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, that's what I always did. And I enjoyed learning, but I was like, you know what? Yeah, we need to, before we start investing in something else, we need to really kind of figure out, what else is going on, because, that's a big investment. So I, at first, tried all the things that I thought were like, logical at the time. Right. And I'm like, okay, I have my Lean Sigma green belt now. How can I be more efficient in like my life? Right. Like, like pre-planned prepping meals, so you're not spending time cooking as much at home, maybe I can, answer some emails, here or there, I was really good at flagging and going back, so I had all that down, and I'm like, okay, well, what else is there? And, I always had, I guess you could say I always had anxiety, but I always had it, right? So it's not like I would have attacks per se. It was just always there. And I never really recognized it as something that was off. I just recognized it as something that I had and I would have to manage. And that I always did. It was just, it was just there.
Yeah.
So, I just was like, okay, what else could this be? So of course I start like looking in the literature, and I'm like, maybe I'm burnt out. I've been doing this for, long hours, you know what I mean? Lots of work. Maybe we're experiencing some burnout. And at the time I remember looking at, what some articles had on burnout. And it was saying that, the only tangible thing I remembered seeing was, help somebody and feel like you're making a difference. And I remembered reading that and being like, well, I'm already doing that. Like, I mean, I had nurses that I was helping advance, through the through the advancement model, you know what I mean? Like, well, I'm doing that, and that does feel good, but there was something else, and I just couldn't put my finger on it. So I was like, okay, well, maybe, of course, right, what we see with burnout, right, is, decrease your stress, get some exercise, get your good sleep. And I went through all the things. I actually was like, okay, I stopped doing like a spin class, and I said, let's just do some yoga at home. Like, maybe I'm such a type A person. Let's integrate some things that were like more relaxing. And I started trying that at home, and I was doing it like 30 minutes every night, I threw in some meditation. I did the, Oprah and Deepak Chopra were having 21 meditation series, and I remembered I was doing them too. But I still didn't feel any different. I even worked with a coach, and I got some hours knocked down, maybe like around 50, but I'm like, no, this just isn't it. So in I guess you could say my pursuit for trying to figure out, what's next or what's going on, I remembered I was going through my email, and I saw this little article in Mind Body Green, and it said, it said something about increasing your frequency. And I was like, let me look. I was like, let me look at that, right? I said, I've been I'm in this constant exhaustion. I feel depleted. Maybe this is a different way to get like an upgrade, right? So I click on this article and I just start, reading it, and they're like, oh, it starts talking about kundalini yoga. And then it goes, hey, go into this link for this like rose meditation or something. I click on this link and I actually just totally get absorbed into hearing this woman, Guru Jaquette. And she's just actually first talking about kundalini yoga. And she's talking it as this technology, this science and technology of angles. And we're talking about so much on how, the physical postures and how the angles that we do really just help upgrade our nervous system. And a lot of the breath work that we do, and even the mantra, not only helps with some nervous system, but helps the glandular system, and how that through a lot of these, through this technology, that we really start to repattern our brain. And it just totally intrigued me, and I'm listening to it. And then finally she's like, let's do some yoga. And I'm totally unprepared, mind you. I'm like on my bed. I was thinking I was going to watch something for 15 minutes. Next thing we know, it was like an hour and a half long. I'm like kicking my legs on my bed. My husband walks in like, what's going on? And I'm like, just go with this. Just, let me finish this up. But I finished this whole like practice, and it was actually a full class. It was the physical practice of relaxation and a meditation. And I finished it and I was like, I actually feel different. Like I felt better. And that was probably the ultimate turning point, because after that, I just started like researching more about her and about yoga, kundalini yoga. And I just started getting immersed in it. And to be honest, after just learning about it for 3 months, maybe 4, I was like, you know what? I need to become a teacher trainer. And I signed up for teacher training. And actually, that's even before doing an in-person class. So
wow.
At the time, I was just like, who do I think I am? I haven't even been to an in-person class, and I'm sitting here signing up for teacher training. But I did go on a weekend retreat and did yoga in person with other people on that one weekend before starting teacher training. So that did eventually happen. But yeah, I mean, that's what got me. It got me completely hooked. And by the time we started teacher training, because it was like a couple of months by the time we registered and started, by that point, I was like, my anxiety was basically completely gone. And I just started, that was really the first major change that I noticed.
Do you think that you had to be in a place of acceptance to accept something new and accept a new path for you? Like, and I'm not necessarily saying it wouldn't have been kundalini, it could have been something else, but do you think you had to be first in that path to say, right, I'm ready to accept change before I can actually move on? Because a lot of people I speak to, we talk about mindfulness, meditation, and the positions that they get to just prior to these, really big career transitions and shifts and pivots. And that seems to be a little bit of a common theme, where people go, right, I'm in a place where I can now accept that this actually has to change, and I'm going to put my belief behind that I can make it happen. Do you think that happened with you?
I do. I think that was a really big part of it, because the more, even though the time period from when I started kind of like investigating to actually starting finding, it was still probably like a year and a half. But there was, I think, a lot of acceptance through multiple time periods. I had to first actually accept the fact that my answer isn't going to be going to more school, right? And I actually had to like accept the fact that like we're going to sit in this moment in time. We're going to sit in this present state and not start, running off to the next thing. So I really think that was probably the first like part of acceptance, because as someone who was constantly, running and trying, right, doing other things, I first had to accept the fact that doing something else wasn't going to actually make it better, and that I actually had to stay in this current space. And yes, try new things. But it really had to be new things, not what I thought that I should do, or not that, people said that this should be the way. And I think that's a big piece too, is that a lot of times we have to accept that the first thing you try isn't going to be the big win, because like I said, I was doing yoga before, and I actually tried a couple different types of yoga at different time points in my life. This is just the one that for me kind of clicked and helped put everything together. And
so do you think there's a reason for that? Because I personally haven't heard of this type of yoga, but I'm, certainly quite intrigued by it. But what do you think set it apart from other things that you tried before?
Yeah. So actually, kundalini yoga is known as the yoga of awareness. And it's known as the yoga of awareness is because it makes the subconscious conscious. Okay. So when you talk about acceptance, this very much goes hand in hand, because we can't accept something until it's in our consciousness. Mm-hmm. So you really can't start to make any changes until it gets to that place. So, with, the way I like to kind of explain it is that so many of us, right, when we think we have stress, right, and people talk all the time how stress comes up in your body, right, like a lot of times your neck and your shoulders. Well, if you're under a stress for long periods of time, or anything that's possibly happened, and I don't always like to use the word trauma because it doesn't have to be like some major traumatic event, but that still sits in your body. It sits in your nervous system. And when we start doing those different practices, that gets released. And then you're able to essentially reprocess them. So as I started doing, kundalini yoga, like I said, I noticed my anxiety essentially went away. But as I actually continued doing it, so much more actually came up. So one big thing that came up is that, my work was very much attached to my identity. Mm-hmm. And the other big thing that really came up is that I actually was feeding my anxiety that whole time. So, the more perfectionistic, the more overthinking, the more I was always planning for the future or worrying about the past, the more I needed a validation before moving forward. All that fed my anxiety. And, that was something that, came to me as I kept doing these practices. And even just as soon as maybe a month or two ago, I actually went and in the midst of doing a class and actually got confirmation on that. When if you're anxious or if you're depressed, you have your right hemisphere is basically overutilized. So your brain isn't in balance. But the more you engage in those behaviors with the anxiety, and the more you stay withdrawn with depression, you actually are making that right hemisphere stronger and keeping your brain not imbalanced. And I, loved hearing that, because it really was the scientific confirmation for what intuition gave me, maybe a year and a half earlier.
Because one of the questions I did want to ask you was, did you feel that you had to mourn your career? Like when you said before, your career and your identity were just interlinked. Did you have to mourn the loss then of that career that you had, and I suppose park it a little bit to be able to move into the next phase of your life?
Yeah, I think actually it's funny you use those words, because I actually think I use those words with a friend of mine. I mean, I am still technically a nurse, I am still doing some nursing work, but it's not wrapped up in my whole identity anymore. And yeah, I think there definitely was a time period where I was, mourning the loss, because I was trying to still now figure out, okay, if this isn't me, what is?
It sounds like a really emotional journey as well, especially if you're dredging up things that you potentially don't have in your conscious state. You've popped it right back at the back of your mind, and then you start to do these practices and things come up. So I imagine it would be quite an emotional process through that. Did you find that?
Yeah, I mean, we all process our emotions differently, right? I've never really been a big like crier or anything like that. But for me, yeah, I mean, having these things kind of pop up, and the biggest part was actually having people to be able to do this with. Especially because a lot of it was coming up when I was in teacher training. But even before teacher training and afterwards, I've had a community of people that have went through maybe not the same story, but different variations of it. And that's really the support that, that was most helpful. And, not necessarily that anyone had any suggestions or ideas, but just kind of knowing that things were all coming up for all of us at some point in time, and knowing that this wasn't essentially abnormal and that this is truly just, us kind of, transforming the way that, we're interacting with ourselves, which ultimately changes how we're interacting with the environment around us.
Absolutely. And I'm curious to know, like, I don't want to put you on the spot. You said a moment ago that, you're still a nurse, and absolutely you are. Mm-hmm. But what were your feelings when COVID hit in the US? Because obviously there's a lot of talk about nurses on the front line and just medicine in general. So how did you feel not being a nurse, I suppose an active nurse, if I can say that, at that time? Did you feel guilty, or did you feel relief because it was just so much?
Well, I was actually still in management for the first, you could say, round of COVID.
Wow. Okay.
Well, because, listen, it's like I said, right? It was, it's hard to disconnect yourself. And, I knew I should have left that position, but, at the end of the day, right, when your identity's been tied in something for so long, you're just like, at first it was trying to figure out, what do I do next? What does that look like? And then truth be known, when COVID hit, it was like, I can't leave now. I'm a nurse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, truth be known, I still was there, and I actually did hop back in and, play ICU nurse for a shift or two,
wow.
Again. And, yeah, I mean, I was, we were kind of preparing for it before it hit as well. So, I mean, my feelings about COVID were just they're very mixed. They're very mixed, because a lot of the practices that, we were all taught to do a certain way very much went out the window. It just, leaves a lot of questions, so. But when it was my time to leave, that worked out. So yeah, I can't lie. When I did part at that time, it was kind of nice just to kind of be for a little bit.
Absolutely. Look, I don't think anybody could begrudge that. I think, you've been there, you've done 18 years in nursing, and, obviously had a massive impact. And I imagine being an ICU nurse and in a critical care nurse is far more intense than any other type of nursing, because you're with, the patients and in that area where you're making those decisions that really do impact life and death all the time. So it's really quite high stress. So you've moved on, you've gone and you've started your own company. So that is Resiliency Reframed. Tell me about why you decided to start your own company, how you came up with the name, and what services you offer people.
Oh, sure. So, about maybe, I don't know, maybe not even 5 years ago, maybe a little less, I actually remembered originally being in my bed and thinking, when I knew that I wasn't going to move forward with another degree, I remember thinking, I think the next step is going to be an entrepreneur, but I had no idea what it was going to look like. And I went through all the nurse entrepreneur things. Nothing really hit me at the time. But I was at least to the point where I was just going to, sit with it and wait. And truthfully, what made me move into this partly was my own experience. And the more that I was going through teacher training, I was like, this is, we can actually like use these practices to help people cultivate more of a healthier wellness lifestyle. And, it almost takes out that thought of, okay, if you really want to, be doing yoga meditation and you really want to be having a healthy lifestyle, you need to spend all these hours doing these things. And the reality is I got started by just, integrating like 3 minutes a day of some breath work and slowly kind of integrating those different components. And what I found is that the more you integrate some of these certain practices, since you're making those internal changes on the inside, those external changes end up being a little bit easier to manage. And so I really honestly at first decided to do it because I believe in it. It made a massive change and impact in my life. And I do believe it can make, changes in others as well. So I came up, go ahead.
No, you keep going.
Sure. So I came up with the name Resiliency Reframed because, in my pursuit for, going through everything, especially when I was in management, everyone's talking about, mindfulness and resiliency. Everyone keeps talking about that. And, I feel like you hear a lot that to build resiliency, you just need, to rest and exercise. And there is some truth to that. You definitely need rest. You definitely need your exercise. But I do think that there's a deeper component to a lot of it. And, it's really, are you getting the proper rest? And are you getting the exercises that are truly invigorating your nervous system? And when I think about resiliency, it's really not just about bouncing back. It's really about this component as well as not just building up that nervous system for the bounce back, but it's also getting your own internal alignment and making sure that, you are aligned with yourself before ensuring that you're aligned with the outside world. Because I feel like that's something that's assumed, right? When you're in the workplace and they're talking about you need to be resilient, there is like this assumption, right? That there's already this connection, there's already this fit. But that's not always there. The resilience works when you feel like you're already 100% aligned and on board.
I think resiliency is probably one of the hardest things that people learn, and the most difficult thing, for somebody to learn. And not everybody has it. And I'm not sure if everybody can develop it either, because I think there's a lot of psychological aspects that come into play. Call people psychos.
Oh yeah.
With that, to be able, because I think resiliency goes on to be how you can, not just how you bounce back, but how you accept things in the first place. So whether you take everything to heart, or whether you're able to understand where somebody's coming from when they're saying something to you, because even now people talk about emails can be misconstrued given if you put a capital in the wrong spot. So do you think that people sometimes are a little bit too touchy? And what would you advise to somebody to be able to build their resiliency? What would be the number one thing that somebody can do to become more resilient?
Sure. So I do think that you could say, your words, people getting a little touchy. But I think a lot of that is the world that we're in today, especially with the social media and media in general. The way our brain works, our brain wants to keep us safe, but our brain's interpretation of safety is something that's familiar. So the more information that you see and hear that you agree with, it reinforces this belief that you already have and feel that is true. And I think we all are pretty aware too that with a lot of the media and the way our computers work, it's going to feed you a lot of information, right? That is essentially like validating an opinion or a thought belief that you already have. So what I definitely see a lot is happening is that I think, especially with this technology, and sometimes, our abilities to get smaller circles in our wider sphere, when people hear thoughts and ideas that are not necessarily in their accepted belief pattern, people get this reaction, right? Mm-hmm. And they almost feel like they're being attacked. And I think we can agree there are people that, act like they're, you're attacking them as a person because they've essentially taken on this thought and ideal belief as part of their identity, mostly because of the way your mind is actually functioning. So
that is
I definitely
such a good
agree.
way to put it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so true, isn't it? Because you get fed things that are validating, what you already think. And it's very rare for people to go out and search beyond their current beliefs. They're far more comfortable in reaffirming what they already hold as true, as opposed to going and challenging that. So I think that's such a great way to put it, Trish, to frame it that way. So what sort of clients do you work with? Who comes and sees you?
Mostly women, And, it's women who are ready for a change. I mean, that's really the big thing. And, the term I use is that if you feel like you've been on a hamster wheel, that is really my ideal client. You feel like you've been on the hamster wheel. You feel like you've done everything right. You feel like everything looks perfect on paper, but you feel off. You feel exhausted, you feel like you don't have energy, and you have nothing to really give back to yourself or really anyone else at the end of the day. So those are my local clients. You got to be ready to make a change, but you feel like you've exhausted all of your options and you've tried, everything else that you feel like you've been told to do.
And so are you enjoying this new chapter in your life?
Oh, I am. I do enjoy, I'm enjoying teaching yoga, starting at a local studio, actually, that I'm very excited, especially with COVID. That's going to be very much exciting again. But yeah, I do. I do work with clients one-on-one, and, I really enjoy watching their success. And I actually, just finished working with a client, and she just said, she goes, I felt like when I started, she goes, I was just a blob. Like I would be done with work and there was no energy. I didn't do anything else. I would just veg out. And she goes, now I have energy. I actually am cooking healthy meals for myself. She lost 21 pounds and, wow. And I'm not a weight loss coach. However, we instituted some of the yogic principles. She also, she kept what she felt was working for her, and she instituted other different things into her, into her daily life. And yeah, and she even said, she was like, I felt like it wasn't like a diet. It wasn't a struggle, but because, she made those changes on the inside. So her body didn't crave a lot of these other things as much as she was doing that. So yeah, so we do that. And I also will say I do have a group program also. It's called Subtle Shifts, Eliminating Burnout and Creating Balance. And, a lot of that just really, we go through an 8-week program, and it's a small group because I do feel like it's important, especially as women, to have a community and to realize that you're not alone. Absolutely. And that's really a huge piece of it, is that a lot of people, even though their lives may look different on the outside, a lot of them were kind of feeling the same struggles and, having the same feelings. But as we kind of go through the program, they're able to start, trying different things through it and starting to look at things a little bit differently.
Yeah, look, I think, learning through groups is fantastic because obviously, people, you're in what state in America are you in?
New Jersey.
New Jersey. So you're in New Jersey, I'm in Australia, and there's people that have the same issues regardless of where they are. So I think it's so good to be able to connect to people that are so far away and diverse and different from you, but still have that connection in the sense that we still go through the same issues.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk quickly about your book that's coming out. So a portion of your story is going to be published in a multi-authored book called Legacy Speaks, and that's coming out May 2021. So tell me about the book, how it came about, and what's in it, and where people can get it.
Oh, sure. So actually, today was our launch day. So that was very exciting. I know. It's so funny. It all happened today. So, talk about things just falling into place. I've liked to write, and I was, to this point where I was like, I really wanted to kind of network, right? And with other people. And lo and behold, one of the women that I knew in one of my yoga groups, and I actually didn't meet her in person. We were in a similar group, and she friended me on Facebook. As it turns out, she lives relatively close to me, and she put out some information about the multi-author book. And I was just like, And it's called Legacy Speaks, and it was stories of transformation and what your legacy is. And I was like, that sounds interesting to me. So I spoke with her about it. I said, listen, this is, the story that I want to tell is relatively, recent. And, we talked about it, and she's like, yeah, I mean, this is a way for us all to kind of share our story and, 25 powerhouse women and, bring this out to the world. And so I was just like, you know what, this is something I want to do. It's, again, it was something a little more creative, something I haven't ventured into before. And, it's definitely a way that, helps push yourself out there. Right. And that's one of the big differences from, being an employee to also being an entrepreneur, is that you're putting yourself out there. So, the book came out. It's available on Amazon. Digital copy is 99 cents. And in 2 weeks, it will be available for print. And I think that even though I have not read the whole book just yet, just from interacting and networking with the other women, we definitely have a lot of themes in all of our books. Even though our chapters all maybe share a different story of our own transformation, we definitely have a lot of underlying themes.
Well, that's amazing. Congratulations. And I can't wait to sort of get my hands on that book. And
Thank you.
Look, Trish, I've really enjoyed chatting with you today. I think you've got an amazing story. You've been on such an adventure, I suppose, into parts of the mind that people should delve into. So I do have one last question though before we go, and that is, Trish, what would you do differently if only you knew?
What would I do differently? You know what? I wish that I had maybe the word is confidence. I wish I had the confidence to be able to listen and trust myself sooner. And that's really a big piece of my story. And I think for a long time, I wasn't listening to myself. And then when I was able to start listening to myself, the next start was trusting what you hear to kind of take that step, even though it may not be, what you planned or what you envisioned. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's having the confidence to listen and trust yourself.
That's such great advice. And to anybody listening out there, I think there seems to be, that common theme with people when they have that reflection on their career and their life, and they go through these transition periods into that next stage, and they've got so much joy and happiness from that, is that they wish they had done it sooner. So if there's anybody out there wanting to do something, do it. Just jump in, do it, enjoy it, and just go for it. So thanks so much for joining me today, Trish. And if you'd like to know more about Trish, head over to ifonlyouknewpodcast.com.au, where I'll have a link to all her socials and her book on the website. Thanks, Trish.
Thanks so much.